I was literally trying to kill myself in the line of duty as an active police officer. In 2016, a couple weeks after Thanksgiving, he actually tried to kill himself. And that was the same time in my life that I was literally trying to kill myself. After 4 years of struggling in silence, I finally got the strength and courage to ask for help. Over the span of our careers, we're exposed to hundreds and hundreds of traumatic incidents. For me, my tipping point was a fatal officer-involved shooting that I was involved in as a brand new police sergeant the night after Christmas. When people read or listen to Relentless Courage, most people say, how is this guy even still alive?
I needed help for a very long time. I'm doing now and trying to spread that message of hope and help. Another reason I got out is because of the liability in law enforcement is insane.
We saved lives that night. I talk about administrative betrayal, what I call institutional betrayal, which is when our blue family or our red family, green family turn their back on us when we need them most. And it's what pushes most first responders over the edge into suicide. Our greatest threat is dying by our own hands.
You guys need to do, and they need to prioritize it, because if you don't, you're gonna lose your family or your job or whatever. Welcome back to the Tim Teaches podcast. I'm your host, Tim McCoy. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Michael Sugrue. Michael is a retired police sergeant out of Walnut Creek PD. He's an Air Force veteran and the co-author of the best-selling book, Relentless Courage. I had the honor of listening to your book yesterday, and boy, you have an incredible story and a lot of highs, a lot of lows. You're helping veterans and helping law enforcement. You're a public speaker. But one of the stars of your book, this guy stood out to me because he's a reserve deputy. He did 35 years with Walnut Creek PD, one of the guys you chalk up to saving your life. You lost him today, I guess, and I was not really expecting you to join me after seeing your post, but I appreciate you taking time and willing to join us and maybe share a little bit about John and his life and how he's helped you. And man, we'll just kind of jump into who you are, what you're all about, and how you're helping people.
Absolutely. So, I did think about canceling the interview today, but I have to tell you, I went to see my friend John Davison last night, and he was in acute care, and we knew he didn't have much time left. And he'd been in and out of consciousness for a couple days, and everyone that had been going to see him, he wasn't communicating at all other than kind of hand squeezes towards the end. And last night at about 8:30, he actually opened up one of his eyes. And tears started coming out of his eyes as I was talking to him, and I gave him a hug. And I promised John that this mission that I'm on from this day forward, this point forward, is absolutely dedicated to him, his memory, his legacy, because I'm here because he did save my life. And my whole purpose is to keep paying that forward, to show people that you're not alone. Because for me, I thought I was alone for so many years, and I suffered in silence, literally losing everything: my marriage, my health, loved ones, eventually my career. And, I could have gone away and just quietly retired and lived a quiet life. But I truly believe that this is my purpose, that it's my calling. It gives me a reason to get out of bed every single day. And what I do is I basically share my own personal story of my deepest, darkest struggles that literally led me down a path to suicide. I was literally trying to kill myself in the line of duty as an active police officer. And my friend John Davison, at the height of my struggle, and I had no idea that he was struggling. He's a Vietnam War veteran. He was in military police, and as you said, he did 35 years with my police department. And in 2016, a couple weeks after Thanksgiving, he actually tried to kill himself when I was on duty. And that was the same time in my life that I was literally trying to kill myself. And I remember when the ambulance brought him into the trauma center, he was covered in blood, in and out of consciousness. And I had 30 seconds to look him in the eye. And I told John, I said, you're gonna pull through this, you're gonna make it. And they rushed him off to emergency surgery. And I sat there for hours in the hospital with his sister who had driven up, with my administrators, other people from the department. And that whole time I just felt this guilt of, why didn't I do something to stop that, to prevent it? I had no idea that he was suffering like that. And all I could think about was my young daughter at the time, who was 6.5 years old. And I kept thinking to myself, what if I do this to myself and she ever finds out that I caused my own death? What is going to be the effect on her future children? It was a month after that attempt, and John survived, thank God. But it was a month after that, after 4 years of struggling in silence, I finally got the strength and courage to ask for help. And it was that phone call that changed everything for me.
Did he, I mean, you guys obviously became extremely close and good friends. I mean, did you guys kind of team up together to support each other in your mental health journeys? And I mean, what kind of help did he wind up getting to change his trajectory?
So I know, initially after he got out of the hospital, he went into a residential treatment program, and he was seeing a therapist and a psychologist and, medications and doing all those things. But I think honestly, what helps the most is really brothers and sisters, or sisters and sisters, just really opening up and bearing their own souls and showing their own vulnerability and having those discussions that we never have. And so that was really the first time after that that John and I were able to have these very just candid, open, no holds barred conversations. And eventually, John recovered and he was back at work, not at the police department because he had retired, but he was back working. He was happy, successful. And he actually got to the point where he joined me when I spoke in front of the California National Guard headquarters in Sacramento, literally in front of over 400 troops, from a one-star general down to privates, and shared his story. And he eventually agreed to share his story in my book, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma. And he actually has his own story where he talks about his experience in Vietnam. He talks about his suicide attempts and talks about how he got out of that. But he also appeared in a short documentary film. It's only 9 minutes. Everybody can find it. So if you're watching this or listening, it's called Stigma of Help. Just go to YouTube, type in Stigma of Help. It was actually made by a nonprofit for combat veterans and first responders called Mission 22, which is actually based out of Oregon, Sisters, Oregon. And it was founded by a Green Beret. Phenomenal, phenomenal nonprofit. I was actually in one of their year-long programs called Recovery and Resilience. And so in this 9-minute film, John is actually interviewed, and he also shares his story with that. And I show that video every time I speak across the country. It's the very first thing I show. I don't show any PowerPoints. I show the one film, the one video, and then I open up and start sharing my story. And I let everyone know how John absolutely saved my life. And so now, every single presentation is dedicated to him and his memory.
Yeah, I actually watched that little documentary because I saw you tagged it in on Instagram today, and so I watched it, and it's powerful. He's an incredible guy, somebody who dedicates his life to service in the military, and then 35 years as a reserve officer. I don't know how Walnut Creek is, but up in Oregon and a lot of departments, it's unpaid. You're volunteering your time, you're going out there, you're putting your life on the line for your brothers and sisters and your other full-time guys, and you're just being that backup, and they're helpful. Not all agencies have them, and not all agencies appreciate them or treat them the same as the full-time guys, but those guys are doing God's work and doing good work and protecting their communities, and they have a heart of service, and it sounds like that's exactly who he was. I wish I read or listened to the book yesterday. And I was like, man, this guy's incredible. I'd love to meet him. And then I saw your post today. So it's, but being able to hear some of that stuff through you, is, I appreciate you sharing with us. I don't know, this is kind of a different day for you. And so I imagine, telling all these stories that you've probably told a million times might not be right up your alley, but you're helping veterans and helping law enforcement. And I know there's so many guys out there who suffer in silence. I mean, myself, I joined as a reserve deputy in 2013. I went through the academy, and it's the same academy. It's just, done over a longer period of time, but shorter, during the week. And, but I mean, yeah, I went into it with my own PTSD, coming into it with PTSD, knowing I had that already. But the thing is, there's such a stigma with PTSD. Just because you have a diagnosis doesn't mean you're going to go be crazy and do something, unhinged. It just means that inside you're probably dealing with a lot of anxiety, and, you're things are harder for you. It's harder to live your life when you're dealing with stress and anxiety and depression and all these different things. But, so many people are afraid to talk about it when they're in law enforcement. They don't want to get stigmatized or pulled off the street or whatever. So it exacerbates the situation. It makes it worse for all these officers who are out there struggling because they are afraid to get help. I know when I went through the psychological exam, that was the biggest thing I was worried about is, shit, I can't lie. I got to tell them, but you try to downplay it a little bit. Oh yeah. Because, you're not a bad person. You're just, you've gone through some stuff, but you're still able to function and contribute to your brothers and your sisters. So all those guys out there listening who are dealing with mental health, like, it's okay to get the help. Like, doesn't make you weak or, so.
Well,
how
I
does
think
your
what's
department?
I think what's
Go ahead.
important is there's a couple things. And first, I want to acknowledge that my friend John was like you, where he didn't get paid a dime. He volunteered 35 years of his life. And when he came home from the Vietnam War, there was no such thing as PTSD. People didn't talk about it. They didn't know what it was. There certainly wasn't diagnosis for it. And like most people, he bottled it up, but he went on to a life of service. And I think what's really also interesting, and we haven't talked about this yet, but John and another reserve officer named Alan were my two best friends in the entire department because they always rode with me. And the way our agency worked was that officers, they were in cars by themselves unless they were teamed up for a special assignment or maybe an overtime gig. But for the most part, I had either John or my friend Alan who rode with me all the time. And so we actually formed very close special friendships, unlike I did with the regular officers. And I think most listeners who aren't really experienced with how law enforcement works, they may be surprised by that. They may think that, oh, you're a reserve, you're an outsider, you're not really part of the club, and you're treated differently. And I will say for Walnut Creek Police Department, we actually had one of the biggest reserve units in the entire San Francisco Bay Area. And we were very supportive of them. But most of these men and women were full-time professionals, very educated, who literally volunteered their off time away from their family and their loved ones and gave back to many the city that they lived in. And so, my hat goes off to you. My hat goes off to all the reserve police officers out there because, especially the ones who aren't getting paid, because you want to talk about service. You want to talk about sacrifice. So, I just wanted to clear the air with that and let you know that, what, reserve officers have my absolute full respect. But when it comes to the stigma of mental health, this is why I advocate for PTSI, so post-traumatic stress injury versus disorder, because I'm going to tell you right now that word disorder has a very negative connotation to it. Nobody wants to be labeled with a disorder. You feel powerless. You feel like you're just stuck with it. There's nothing you can do about it. But that's not the case. With post-traumatic stress injury, it's actually normal. What happens is we as normal people, we go into these professions because we truly care. We truly care about other people. We truly care about making a difference. And then over the span of our careers, we're exposed to hundreds and hundreds of traumatic incidents. And when I say a conservative estimate is 500 for a typical career, that is a low conservative estimate. And if you look at the normal population, most people may have one or two traumatic incidents over an entire lifetime.
Mhm.
And when you talk about police officers, firefighters, paramedics, dispatchers, military service members, we're exposed to a much higher volume of these horrendous, horrible incidents. And the fact is, they do take a toll on you. They take a toll on everybody. Now, if we had a culture where we could openly discuss these things and talk about them after they happen and process them and then move on, I think we would be much healthier. But what happens, and I did this in my case, is that I just let them bottle up and bottle up. And I told myself, I don't know these people. I'm going to detach myself from the calls and the job. None of this affects me. But eventually, there's going to be a tipping point. And for me, my tipping point was a fatal officer involved shooting that I was involved in as a brand new police sergeant the night after Christmas. And so it wasn't so much that that incident itself broke me. It was that these hundreds of traumatic incidents before that, I never dealt with, I never processed. And because of that, when this final incident happened, that's what pushed me over the edge. And so, when people think about post-traumatic stress injury, it's an injury. And just by that means, it means that you can get better. It can be healed. There's a lot of different things that you can do to overcome that. No different than, many police officers, firefighters deal with knee injuries, shoulder injuries, back injuries. What do, right? We go, we see the doctor, we get some pain meds. Maybe we get put off work. We try some physical therapy, maybe some injections, maybe surgery if we have to, more physical therapy. The point is that in many cases, and I'll even say most cases, we get better. But the thing is, we're never the same as we were before that injury, right? So as good as our back can get, our shoulder, our knee, it can get better, but it's never going to be better than it was before that injury that caused it, right? And so with post-traumatic stress, we're never going to be the same people that we were before we started this career. I can assure you of that. But I can also tell you that with work and trying lots of different things that I talk about in the book, things that work, things that didn't work, you can actually come out a even better person. I used to be a very black and white person, and I don't mean that by ethnicity or color. I mean that by if you broke the law, I didn't care what the reasons were. It was simply you're going to jail or I'm writing you a ticket. I didn't want to hear about anything else. And the fact is that, so many people, normal people, are dealing with drug addiction, alcoholism, family problems, health problems, financial problems, and all these things take a toll. And so what people need to realize is keep an open mind. You have to try different things. Not everything works for everybody. And for most people, it's a combination of different things that end up working in the end. And now I'll tell you that even after all the hell I've been through, and when people read or listen to Relentless Courage, most people say, how is this guy even still alive? How is he still here? But I can tell you, I wouldn't change a single thing looking back at it because it put me where I'm at today. And I'm living a better life today. I'm a better father. I'm a better partner to my fiance. I'm a better person than I was before all of that happened. And so I want people to know that there's hope and that there's help. But you have to have the strength and courage to ask for that help. And that honestly was the hardest, most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. It was nothing in the military. It was nothing in law enforcement. It was me raising my hand saying, you know what? I can't do this by myself. I can't do this anymore. I've got to make a change.
Yep. And that's where you got it. That's where you get to where it's like you've tried, it's either kill yourself or change because you can't keep going on the way you're going, and you made the right choice. Yeah, your book is, ugh, dude, it's just thing after thing that you've gone through, and to be alive and make it through it and be the person you are and helping all the people that you do. I mean, there's not there's not words. It's incredible that you've come through this. And life still happens. Things still come up. Just because you're perfect one day, you got to keep working, and you got to keep understanding that, like, hey, I'm gonna stay on this path that I'm on, and don't look back to the things that have happened in the past. Those are just things that have happened to you, not who you are. And that's what I try to hammer home to myself, because yeah, mine wasn't one thing. I had trauma after trauma, kind of similar stuff. And what broke me was where I finally needed help. I needed help for a very long time, but the thing that finally was the straw that broke the camel's back was a call that I went on, and I lost a little boy who was the same age as my son. Shared my birthday. My birthday is June 7th. My son is June 6th, and this little boy was June 7th, same age as my son, and performed CPR on this poor little kid in front of his mom, and little baby, same age as my daughter, and couldn't save him. And that was it. It just destroyed me. And got back on all this medications. None of that shit works, and if you've done any research on me, I handled it a little different. I did psychedelics, and that's actually what fixed me. And I didn't do it just because I like drugs or anything like that. This was like my last hope, and that, I tried the therapy, I tried the medication and all this stuff, and nothing seemed to break through for me. I don't know if I'm thick-headed or what, but that worked for me, and it really did changed my life, and it put me on this, what I'm doing now, and trying to spread that message of hope and help. And I don't encourage people to go out there and try illicit anything. If you're going to do stuff like that, get help in the right setting, and set and setting, and the people that you can trust. And but man, you went through it, and it wasn't just work. It was, being in law enforcement, you're setting yourself up. People don't understand this, and this is another reason I got out, is because of the liability in law enforcement is insane. And you could share if you want to, but your incident led to a lawsuit that lasted for 4 years of just having that kind of stuff hang over your head. The amount of pressure is unimaginable, and people don't realize that. They think, oh, you have immunity. No, you don't. You don't have immunity. Maybe criminally, maybe if you're lucky, but these guys putting themselves out there. I've watched officers that I've worked with started as a reserve. They all went full time. I was smart enough, and always in the back of my mind, like, I knew my mental health challenges. And so I'm like, I can do this, but I need to be able to do it and step away from it if I need to, but those guys, my age, they look 20 years older than me already after 10 years of being in law enforcement. It just eats at you, man, because it's thing after thing, and these guys don't talk about it. They just bottle it all up, and it's rough, man.
Well, I think, you bring up a couple important things too. And even in my time in law enforcement, the climate has completely changed. After George Floyd, there was a huge movement against law enforcement, and, downsizing departments and taking away resources and pulling officers out of schools. And, I experienced it because after my shooting, which happened the very end of 2012, I ended up on federal trial in 2016. And, it was a justified shooting. I'm not going to go into all the details because it's in the book and I want people to read it. I want them to listen to it. But I will tell you that it was a completely justified shooting. We saved lives that night. The even couple that we saved, they later testified to that. The facts were very clear. And we received qualified immunity on the first round of shots, but not on the second round of shots. And the thing is that this incident that I wanted to forget, I couldn't forget it. I had to remember every finite detail for 4 years. And then, once on trial in San Francisco, one of the worst places you can imagine to be a police officer on trial, I had to relive that incident every single day for 2 weeks straight and listen to these crazy expert witnesses that were hired by the plaintiff's attorneys who were saying that we, were cold-blooded killers, that we planted evidence, that this guy with this huge knife was not a threat. He wasn't trying to hurt anybody. And, this, but the guy that tried to kill me has an identical twin brother, and
Yeah.
he was in the courtroom. And I had to see that same face, the same face that sometimes is in my nightmares today. I mean, my nightmares have lessened, but I still occasionally have nightmares about that incident. And, we talk about training to take a life, and we know that if we ever have to do that, that's the expectation. But in this case, I had to take a life. And people don't realize that less than 1% of all police officers are ever forced to be in a fatal officer involved shooting. Most officers, fortunately, will never take a life. And when you do, it affects everybody differently. And in my case, it affected me then, it affects me today. And I know that it will affect me 30 years from now. Because every situation is unique and it's different, and there's a lot of unique things about my shooting, about my incident, that make it so difficult. And if there was a different option, if there was something else I could have done, I would have done it. But there was no other choice. There was no other option other than us being killed and a couple being killed. And that's the sad reality of it. And I don't think most people realize that when you have to do that, you don't just go on with your life. You don't just go on a week later and forget about it and like it never happened. These kinds of things will stick with us. Just like when you mentioned that girl, that child, dying in your arms. I had a similar call, and I was going through my divorce, and we got to a medical call, and I was first one there with two officers, and I saw the firefighters giving CPR to this girl that looked like my daughter's age at the time. And I remember just losing it and breaking down in front of, it was the grandparents, because they were watching the daughter, because the parents had gone on their first vacation in like 5 years.
Oh.
And literally like the second night of their vacation, they find out that literally their daughter died.
Oh my gosh.
And so, again, that incident, when you brought yours up, it immediately brought it back to me. And these are the
Yeah.
calls, the things that we're not going to forget. And we go to horrible car accidents, fatal car accidents. We go to domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, homicides, but even just natural deaths.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been to probably over 100 just natural deaths, and all those things take a toll. And so that's why I want people to know that, look, this is not normal to see these things, to deal with these things. It's normal for our profession and our job, but it's not normal for a human being to be exposed to this level of trauma. And that's why we have to be proactive about it. And we need to change this culture to make it okay. Just talk about it. Because really, it's getting it off your chest. It's getting it off your shoulders and just being a human, acknowledging the humanity of what we just had to see and do.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to change the culture. And I will tell you that I'm not special and I'm not unique, and nothing I've been through is special or unique. The fact is, though, that I'm willing to talk about it openly. Like when I speak or I do interviews, it's no holds barred. Like I will talk about anything and everything, and no question is ever off the table, whether it's in my personal life, my relationships, my profession, because I want people to know that this is straight from the heart, because
Yeah.
they're going to feel it and they're going to know it because they're dealing with the same exact things.
They are. And it's just not talked about, and it's stigmatized, and it's horrific. And I don't understand how some of these guys, they may make it through their career, but they're not coming out in a positive manner, man. And so many of these guys, and we've gone on calls where, whoever from the department that retired, 5 years ago, ended up taking their own life, and we're going out there to handle that call, and it's so common. It's so common. It's just heartbreaking. And I don't know, what the real answer is. It's like, because they deal with it so much, talking to mental health professionals, talking to each other, having that camaraderie, um, it definitely helps. But it's like, after 20 years or 30 years of people doing this and being exposed, I don't know how you come out of it unscathed, and you don't. Um, but, one of the things you brought up, and it hit home with me because I did 10 years, and literally left because, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I had, the undersheriff was the only person that, was like, oh, thanks. Basically, when I turned in my stuff, not one person sent a message, not one sent a message and said, hey man, thanks for the 10 years you put in for free. Didn't make one
Mm.
penny, and when you're out, and I've seen it with full-time guys too, when you're out of the brotherhood, you're out. And it's horrible because, you know, as an officer, we've watched the guy retire and walk out the door, and it's like, oh, there goes what's his name, and you feel good about him, and then you just move on with your life. And that guy is out there now; he's all by himself, and he's dealing with all this trauma that y'all had together, but nobody's reaching out to him, and he's on his own now. And I know a lot of guys like that now who've retired, and they're on their own, and they've lost that brotherhood, and you need that community to stay somewhat in a clear mental space. um,
You bring up a good point, but you're spot on because I will tell you that, and I talk about administrative betrayal, what I call institutional betrayal, which is when our blue family or our red family, green family turn their back on us when we need them most. And this is what I think, in my opinion, hurts us the most. And it's what pushes most first responders over the edge into suicide. And it's not very often talked about. And we even hesitated putting this in the book. But what I found is that this is the number one theme that is resonating with most listeners and readers because we've all dealt with it, but nobody talks about it. In many cases, we're ordered not to talk about it. And the sad reality is that, you have to have an identity outside of the job, outside of the profession, and realize that your family at home, your friends outside of law enforcement, those are the important relationships. And it's important to have a separate life outside of work. The ones who suffer the most in the end are the ones where this is their only identity.
yep.
Literally, when they don't have that badge and gun anymore, they have lost everything. And you mentioned it, but the sad truth is that our life expectancy is 5 years after retiring from a career in law enforcement. And suicide, it's the number one killer over line of duty deaths for those that are currently working. But also, suicide is one of the highest risks after retirement. And I know people personally. I mean, I see it all the time now. I mean, it's gotten better as far as agencies and departments kind of sharing that and kind of putting it out there on social media in the hopes that it helps prevent other incidents like that. But even the numbers, as good as they are, they're greatly underreported. We're literally losing hundreds of officers, and that's just police officers. I'm not even talking about firefighters, dispatchers, paramedics, every single year to their own hands. Our greatest threat is dying by our own hands, not by being killed by some suspect or assailant on the street. It's literally dying by our own hands. That is the number one threat.
What is, I mean, what can be done besides talking about it? Is it just changing the culture in law enforcement agencies, or is it teaching the officers like, hey, you have to have these other outlets, you have to have these other families, like whether it's CrossFit, because I've heard or any of these different activities that put you in a community type environment where you have some support. Because I don't, I don't know what the answer is. So many of these guys are just, they're in the thin blue line, and that's all they hang out with, and then they retire, and they got nobody. And I got a friend, a recent friend, who just retired, and he was, sergeant and SWAT, and he listens to this program, and I love him. But he's kind of out, on his own now that he's out of the brotherhood after 25 years, and it sucks. And so I don't know what avenues there are, or what communities. Do you have a group that you're affiliated with that kind of
Well,
helps you?
there's not a single answer to that question. There's a lot of different aspects. I mean, it starts in the police academy. And what I mean by that is, you bring in senior officers or first responders that come in and they talk to, these young people who are so excited to start their careers and their jobs, and just give them a heads up. I mean, it's not going to really resonate at that point, but at least you're exposing them to say, look, this is a seasoned officer or firefighter. Here's what they experienced on the job and their personal life. And here's their advice on things not to do. And I talk about a lot of the mistakes that I made in my book when I speak. Don't do what I did in this case. And like I thought, don't talk about work at home. I'm going to protect my family by doing that. And what I did was I created a divide. I didn't have a healthy communication with my wife at the time because I never talked about the crappy stuff I was seeing or the horrible day I had. I would just come home pissed off in a bad mood, and she was walking around on eggshells around me. Whereas if I would have come home and had a healthy communication, a healthy relationship where, I could decompress and I could get some of the stuff off my chest and be real with her and share about what I was going through, and not graphic details, but simply saying like, look, I went to a horrible car accident today. And so if I seem off or I seem in a bad mood, that's why. And I just
Mhm.
need some time to decompress. Let me go for a walk or a run, or let me go to the gym. I'll come back. And after I shower, we can sit down, we can talk about it. But, you're expressing that it's not them, it's what you saw and had to deal with. But it's also when you're at work, like I said, having that culture where you can actually have these conversations without worrying about ramifications on your career or assignments or promotions or people not trusting you or looking down upon you. And there's a lot that will take that to shift that actual culture. But you've got to have the healthy communication and relationships both on the job and at home. But also establishing early on relationships with therapists, maybe clinicians, not waiting for the big incident, but having that person that you can meet with or call up when you need to, when something is going on, whether it's your personal life or at work. I think that's super important. Learning about peer groups. I currently go to a first responder support meeting. I never heard about these. I didn't know about them, but they have them all over the country. And they're private, confidential meetings. They're not associated with any agency. Many of the people that I deal with have gone to the West Coast post-trauma retreat. So they're alumni of that organization. But I also know like Save a Warrior, another retreat that I went through, they have groups that they run. So there's so many organizations out there where their alumni form these peer groups where they meet every single week, whether it's in person, whether it's online, and they can keep these connections. They can have these trusted, private, confidential conversations when they need to. They can be real, they can be open, they can be vulnerable. And with that being said, we need our leaders at all levels in law enforcement, the military, firefighters, to be vulnerable, to be open,
Mhm.
because how on earth can we expect our troops or our people below us, the ones that we supervise and quote unquote lead, come to us when they're having issues or problems if we're not willing to be open and vulnerable ourselves first?
Yeah.
And that's the key. If you ever want to get somebody to open up to you and be honest and be real, you got to start by being honest, vulnerable, and real yourself.
Mhm. Yeah.
Otherwise, how are you going to have that trust? How are you going to build that bridge? But again, there's things like fitness, there's psychedelics, like you mentioned. I had a stellate ganglion block, which is a medical procedure to treat the physical symptoms of PTSD. I talk about that in the book. There's equine therapy, there's yoga. For me, I have routine. I practice gratitude every night. I go to the gym every single day for 2 hours. I still go to meetings. I still have a therapist. I don't go all the time, but now I see a therapist every 2 weeks instead of every week. But there's things that I do to maintain my mental health. No different than people that maintain their physical fitness. There's things that you have to do and continue to do to maintain your mental fitness, to maintain your mental health.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, and you're putting in the work, and it's showing, and it's been paying off for you. And that's what guys need to do, and they need to prioritize it, because if you don't, you're gonna lose your family or your job or whatever. And I think setting up, somebody to talk to ahead of time, and finding that person that's right for you, a therapist that's right for you, is so important. You talked about finding the wrong person, or walking in and getting, poo-pooed right off the bat. And it's like, there's good people out there and there's bad. You got to find the person that works for you and resonates with you. And man, that's so important. What's the rest of your year looking like? What's your projection now?
So the thing is, I truly am focused on living life to the fullest. I'm focused on my daughter. I'm focused on my relationship. And, I made a mistake early on where my career came first, and I had these aspirations to be chief of police someday and do all these things. And my aspiration right now is to be the best father that I can be, to be the best partner that I can be. And so when I speak across the country, I literally limit it to 4 to 5 times max a year, and that is it. I'm not one of those guys that goes out on a speaking circuit that speaks, twice a week or 3 times a week. I'm not doing that. Like, I literally want to enjoy life. So, going to the gym with my buddies, going out to lunch, going to concerts, baseball games, hockey games, football games, literally just having fun, like making up for all that missed time. So, I'll do occasional interviews like this,
Yeah.
speak a few times. But other than that, live life to
I,
the fullest.
I love it, man. That's the key. Do fun things. Life is short, man. And just enjoy your life, and be around your friends and your family. And work is great, but don't get yourself all wrapped up in it, because once you're done, the people that you're out there grinding for day in, day out, once you walk out that door, they forget about you, I promise. And you have your friends and your family, and your hobbies, and just your own mental health that you need to stay on top of. Man, I love it. It sounds like you're living the dream. I hate that
Yes,
term. That's awesome. I'm
absolutely.
proud of you for doing the hard work. And like, people out there need to follow in your footsteps of just doing the work. Get help. And there is light at the end of the tunnel out there for people. How do people get your book? What's the best way?
So the book, Relentless Courage, Winning the Battle Against Frontline Trauma, it's on Amazon. You can get it in Kindle, paperback, hardcover, or Audible. The Audible we actually did in our own voices, and I relived every single incident in that studio. So when you hear it, it is raw, it is real, it's gripping. But you can also get it online at walmart.com, Barnes and Noble, other book retailers. But I strongly recommend the Audible. Like you, I
Yeah,
can't read books
I
anymore.
can't.
Part of it is I don't have the focus and concentration I used to have before post-traumatic stress injury. But there's also a lot of military veterans out there with TBI, or people just don't have the time. And for me, I can listen to an Audible when I'm in the shower, when I'm getting ready, when I'm driving the car, when I'm at the gym. And so, I get it. A lot of people don't read these days, and I'm not judging because I don't either.
Yeah.
I do Audibles, so strongly recommend that Audible.
Oh, it's fantastic. I listened, literally, I was in the car. We're having a major snowstorm up here, and I had to go over to the coast, and I saw my dad. And so it's usually 2.5 hours, and I'm like, oh, I won't finish the whole book, but I don't know. It snowed, and I was going 30 miles an hour, and it took us like 8 hours. So I got the whole book in, and
Awesome.
but it was fantastic. And I was like, oh man, you gotta read the, or listen to the book, or read it, but listen to it. It is raw, and you could feel the emotion. And it's not just you, it's your co-authors, and they have amazing points in there too. Um, Man, Michael, I appreciate you joining me, and all the work you're doing out there. And I, you know, just my thoughts are with you, with your friend, the loss of your friend. He sounded like an incredible guy. I mean, I wanted to talk a little bit about your stepdad, and he's a big old fella, cop, but read the book and listen to that, and you'll get all the stories in there. It's a great, great book. So thank you very much for joining me.
It was my pleasure. And anybody that's listening to this or watching it, I'm on pretty much every social media platform out there. I check my messages every single day. I will get back to you. I will respond to you. So if you do happen to listen or read Relentless Courage, please reach out to me. I want to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely.
So thank you for having me, and keep up the great work.
For sure. And I'll tag you in all this, and it'll be blasted all over the screen while we're playing the video. So
Awesome.
thank you much.
Thank you, brother.